Yeah, good morning. Before it comes to the Uzbekian Prof, you have to work. Excellences, ladies and gentlemen, peace lovers, I greet you. Have the honor to moderate the introductory panel. For the man is not this is the man's wolf. The first panel is the strategic expectations and from an international perspective. We are the organizer is the Schiller Institute, the OKV, and the Académie Géopolitique de Paris. I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong. We are in a very bad situation what concerns the international law is in shambles. We are not able to have a fair industry system. There's no sovereignty anymore, and we don't have anything like that in the West, especially the aggressive policy against Iran, China, Russia, and against Africa. We are approaching logically into an unlogically crisis system. We have also nuclear weapons threatened to be deployed, and this may open the door to hell. So it's very necessary to think about new international relations, to discuss long-term solutions, but this cannot occur under the unilateral perspective. The idea that the dominant power is dictating the order like a Leviathan, which has to control things, is not acceptable. Therefore, we have today and tomorrow a collection of unprecedented speakers who are presenting these ideas. They come from Europe, America, Eurasia, and Africa. Some are here personally, and some are online. This is in a series of conferences, a network, a dialogue between those powers in Europe and the majority of mankind, which is fighting for that aims. The BRICS are representative of that, but if you only listen at the German media coverage, you have never seen anything what is going on there. Here we are convinced about our situation that everybody must be downgraded. But here we hear the real voices of the international order, which is based on equality and better chances for everybody. Again, I welcome you. We have a keynote speech by Helga Zepp-LaRouche, which will start immediately. Then we follow. It will be followed by more speeches, and I hope everybody keeps to the 10-minute speech time, because we want to have a discussion period with you, and we have online discussion also. It's very important that we can hear your opinions and that you have an exchange with the speakers. Today, Helga Zepp-LaRouche will start. The president and founder of the Schiller Institute, Third World War or New Global and
Dear participants, I'd like to welcome you here to the conference of the Schiller Institute, wherever you may be, all friends of peace. We have gathered here today because we want to find a way out of the highly threatening strategic situation and to counteract widespread pessimism, indeed fatalism. It is indeed possible to intervene in history, provided one has a good plan and can mobilize sufficient forces to implement it. I would therefore like to preface our conference with this quote from Friedrich Schiller's work on the decline of the Netherlands. Kann ich das lauter machen? Great and comforting is the thought that despite the defiant presumptions of princely power, there is still a remedy available, that their most calculated plans will be brought to shame by human freedom, that hearty resistance can bend even the outstretched arm of a despot, that heroic perseverance can finally exhaust his terrible resources. Let us give a new and irrefutable example of what people can dare to do for a good cause and what they can achieve through unity. End of quote. To do this, however, we must first wake our contemporaries from their apparent sleepwalking into which they seem to have fallen, especially here in Germany. The world has never been closer to a point of no return, to a potential endpoint in history where the final catastrophe of a global nuclear war becomes inevitable. Friedrich Schiller, in many of his works, used the term punctum saliens, which in drama and history describes the moment when everything starts moving inexorably. In his fourth letter on Don Carlos, he writes, "Every action has its punctum saliens, where it leaps from possibility into reality." In relation to history, we can pinpoint these points of no return when, for example, it became too late to prevent World War I or World War II. In relation to the immediate future, however, manifold uncertainties cloud this insight when it becomes certain that a third and this time final global war, this time a nuclear war, will break out. Then it will be too late. Humanity, and with it our history, will be wiped out. We are currently witnessing the collapse of the world order as it emerged after World War II, and then again in a modified form after the end of the Cold War. One of the most significant milestones in this development was August 15th, 1971, when President Nixon of the US embarked on the fatal path of deregulated monetarism with the introduction of flexible exchange rates, the consequences of which LaRouche prophetically predicted would lead to a new depression, to a new fascism, and to a new world war, unless a completely new world economic system was created in time. And that is exactly where we stand today. To understand how we could have arrived at this point only 35 years after German reunification, let's take a look back. For a brief period before the fall of the Berlin Wall and reunification, we experienced a golden age for humanity, one of those rare moments in history when the course can be completely reset. The former US ambassador to Moscow, Jack Matlock, emphasized at a recent conference of the Schiller Institute that even before its dissolution in 1991, the Soviet Union no longer posed a threat. So there was no longer any enemy. It would therefore have been entirely possible to establish a new peace order for the 21st century at the end of the Cold War. Lyndon LaRouche initially proposed the economic basis for such a peace order with his productive triangle, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, the productive triangle. And at that time, we fought for our right to sovereignty, which is also enshrined in the 2+4 Treaty for Germany. But we have been completely cheated of this sovereignty, not only in the new federal states, but in Germany as a whole. US, Russia, German, British, and French documents that have since been reclassified and are now available in the US National Archives, the State Department, Pentagon, presidential libraries, and various national archives and university libraries prove not one, but a veritable flood of promises against NATO's eastward expansion that were made to Gorbachev and Shepard Nazis by Baker, Bush, Genscher, Kohl, Gates, Mitterrand, Thatcher, Hurd, Major, and Werner. These documents clearly show that the promise not to expand NATO 1 inch to the east was so central that the Russian complaints of having been deceived are absolutely justified. The keynote speech given by Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher at a conference of the Protestant Academy in Tutzin on January 31st, 1990, played a decisive role. Genscher emphasized, "We do not want unity at the expense of third parties. It is NATO's responsibility to make it clear, whatever happens in the Warsaw Pact, there will be no expansion of NATO territory to the east. It is closer to the borders of the Soviet Union. These security guarantees are important for the Soviet Union and its behavior," said Genscher. Significantly, his speech has virtually disappeared from the internet and can only be found with some technical effort. The Tutzin formula was to set off a storm of important diplomatic talks over the next 10 days, culminating in the decisive meeting between Kohl and Gorbachev on February 10th, at which Gorbachev gave his agreement in principle to German reunification. Considering the sheer volume of these promises, there can be no doubt that they played a key role in persuading the Russian leadership at the time to show enormous generosity in facilitating German reunification. And that was just 45 years after the end of World War II. This makes it all the more understandable that Russia viewed the West's subsequent policy as a tremendous breach of trust. The motive for this change of direction lay in the fact that the neocons and their Wolfowitz doctrine prevailed in the US, which was intended to consolidate the US's leading role in a new unipolar world order. According to this doctrine, the US reserves the right to decide alone when and where to intervene militarily, including preventive strikes against perceived threats. Despite changing administrations, they determined policy as an expression of a permanent bureaucracy. What followed was the rejection of the Westphalian system of peace by Blair in his speech in Chicago in 1999, replaced by the policy of right to protect, the humanitarian intervention wars, which after September 9th, 2001, which LaRouche had prophetically predicted as the coming Reichstag fire on January 3rd, were waged under the banner of the war on terror in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, as well as color revolutions and regime changes, as well as NATO's eastward expansion, accompanied by the unilateral termination of all arms control and disarmament treaties, ABM, INF, Open Sky, KSE. While the US administrations had no problem with Yeltsin, who willingly submitted to the IMF shock therapy and thus allowed Russia's industrial capacity to be reduced to only 30% between 1991 and 1994. Putin's efforts to restore Russia's status as a world power stood in the way of the vision of a unipolar world order. The Maidan coup of 2014, in which Victoria Nuland played an unforgettable role, marked the serious beginning of a proxy war by NATO against Russia. The admission by Angela Merkel and François Hollande that the Minsk agreement had only served to train Ukrainian forces to NATO standards had contributed significantly to the now total loss of trust. Western military experts have pointed out that the relatively small Russian troop deployment in February 2022 proves that Putin had no intention of attacking the whole of Ukraine, but wanted to come to the aid of the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. On March 31st of this year, the New York Times published a 13,000-word article presenting the results of a year-long investigation based on 300 interviews, which documented that the U.S. had been commanding the war in Ukraine directly from the clay barracks in Wiesbaden since at least mid-April 2022, practically at the same time as Boris Johnson's intervention in Kiev, which sabotaged the diplomatic solution reached in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine. While the official narrative of an unprovoked war of aggression remains the dogma with which even NATO-critical politicians feel compelled to begin their speeches, NATO's full involvement in this conflict is overwhelmingly documented. David Ignatius, the notorious mouthpiece of the permanent bureaucracy in the US, revealed as early as 2022 in a series of articles in the Washington Post where the conviction of politicians comes from who, despite all the evidence on the battlefield and in the economy, incessantly repeat that Russia will be ruined, or as German Chancellor Merz says, Putin must lose. Behind this lies the belief that the new revolution and warfare that has taken place in Ukraine, combining the trench warfare of World War I with the most modern weapons of the 21st century, namely the use of AI to spy on the enemy, has checkmated Russia. Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, sees it this way, quote, "The power of the most advanced algorithmic warfare systems is now so great that it is equivalent to having tactical nuclear weapons against an enemy who only has conventional ones. The general public underestimates this. Our adversaries no longer do." And General Mark Milley said at the end of 2022, "We are currently witnessing the way wars will be fought and won for many years to come. We are part of a military alliance with NATO in which Germany's survival is not a priority." On November 20th, 2024, Admiral Thomas Buchanan of US Stratcom in Washington stated at an event titled Report Launch, Project Atom 2024, hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that the US would be prepared to engage in a nuclear exchange if US global leadership were at stake. His only reservation was that the US should ensure that it retained enough nuclear weapons to maintain US hegemony afterwards. Admiral Buchanan's remarks were not a slip of the tongue. They were backed up by the Nuclear Posture Review 2022, in which President Biden, or whoever is in charge in the final years of the Biden administration, reserves the right to use nuclear weapons preventively if the vital interests of the US or its allies are threatened. Although renowned experts such as Ted Postol, as well as participants in NATO maneuvers, point out that Germany's survival would not be taken into account in an emergency. They would not be taken into account in an emergency. Otherwise, Buchanan's view that two tactical nuclear wars can take place and be won is pure fantasy. Postol had convincingly demonstrated why such a limited use would lead to the use of all nuclear weapons. Incidentally, just one day after Buchanan's lecture, Putin demonstrated with the deployment of the first Oreshnik hypersonic missile in Dnipro that Russia had a non-nuclear weapon that, with kinetic energy alone, due to its high speed, up to Mach 10 to 11, against which there is no defense system, while Karp and Millet's predictions at that time had not been proven true on the battlefields. It is inconceivable. Only 80 years after the collapse of National Socialism in Germany and the end of World War II, and the then, under the impression of the ruins, quite serious "never again" slogan, this country is made to be made warlike again at all levels of society. And the most frightening thing about this is that a large part of German society either seems to have accepted the narrative spread by the mainstream media about the reasons for it, or feels paralyzed. Between the EU's Rearm Europe program and the so-called Defense and Resilience Clause, also known as Security and Defense Exceptions, which is a kind of enabling act, we are now on the path to an arms race that allows unlimited borrowing for defense spending. We in Europe, in doing so, the existential interests of the German people, whom all members of the government have sworn in an oath of office to protect from harm, are being completely sacrificed on the altar of transatlantic subservience. The purpose of our conference is to show a way out of this impasse. We must put a new global security and development architecture on the agenda in good time, one that takes into account the security and economic interest of all states on this planet. And this is absolutely possible because the geopolitical view that one absolutely needs an enemy has long since found an alternative. The attempt to establish a unipolar world order has suffered a major setback for some time now, because after 500 years of colonialism, the nations of the global south were by no means prepared to submit to a unipolar world order. The experience of unilateral sanctions imposed on many states, the instrumentalization of the dollar as a weapon, credit and trade conditions perceived as unfair, and much, much more, all contributed to activating the spirit of Bandung, a milestone in the history of the non-aligned movement. China's unprecedented economic rise, which lifted 850 million of its citizens out of poverty in around 40 years, and eliminated extreme poverty by the end of 2021, considered unprecedented in the history of global poverty reduction, as well as China's meteoric rise in science and technology, which, according to the Australian think tank ASPI, has made it to the world leader in 57 of 63 cutting-edge technologies, has made it the primary threat in the eyes of Anglo-American neocons, but has proven to be a true blessing for the countries of the global south. Since President Xi Jinping declared the New Silk Road to be China's official policy in 2013, a program that had a great affinity with our Eurasian land bridge of 1991, and is increasingly converging with our World Land Bridge program of 2014, China is now working with almost 150 nations on the Belt and Road Initiative, They had a volume with the countries of the global south of approximately 2.5 trillion euros in 2023. And even that is only a fraction of the potential of the projects that have been started. So the BRICS, which now includes 10 member states and 10 partners and represents more than half of humanity, have just concluded their annual summit in Rio, and all speakers, including many from guest countries, enthusiastically and firmly expressed their intention to build a just economic system that offers all participating nations the prospect of finally overcoming poverty, of finally building their economies and developing health and education systems, and to participate in the scientific and technological progress of humanity on the basis of division of labor and equality. The BRICS do not see themselves as an alternative to NATO and certainly not as a bloc. They are open to cooperation with all countries of the world. So President Trump is wrong when he claims that the BRICS were founded to harm the US. They were founded to overcome the underdevelopment of the global majority. So don't believe a word you read in the Western media about the BRICS. Supposedly, they are divided, as Xi and Putin did not participate, the momentum has been lost. But the opposite is true. Although all BRICS countries are under enormous pressure and are responding to this pressure in very different ways, the trend toward a new era for humanity is unstoppable. The nations of the global south are determined to realize their right to equal economic development, to no longer be suppliers of raw materials, but to build up the value chain in their own countries, to develop industry and agriculture, and become middle-income countries in the near future. The Schiller Institute has prepared a study for this conference, currently in progress. It's still being worked on, but it was ready for this conference, about how Europe, together with China and other BRICS countries, can support the countries of Africa and Southwest Asia in particular through joint ventures in this development. Initially, we focused on the three key countries, Germany, France, and Italy, with the other countries to follow. That in order to show that such cooperation not only helps Africa and the Middle East, but that these joint ventures can also become the driving force for overcoming the deep economic crisis in which Europe's economy currently finds itself. Instead of pouring trillions of euros into rearmament, which destroys productive capacity from the point of view of the real economy, we should join forces with China to invest in areas that have always been at the forefront of successful industrialization. Widespread energy production and distribution, basic continental infrastructure, and beyond that, investment in some so-called game-changer projects, such as the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, which is a showcase for Africa, Europe, China cooperation that addresses two of the most pressing issues, water and electricity. Furthermore, the Transaqua project, which enables water management, hydropower, transportation, and agro-industrial development projects for 12 countries in the heart of Africa. And finally, the Grand Inga hydroelectric project, which will generate more than a third of the electricity currently produced in all of Africa. Despite the economic crisis, European countries still have the scientific and technological know-how that is urgently needed in Africa. Europe is gaining growing markets from increasingly wealthy customers and is resolving the refugee crisis in the only humane way possible by creating good reasons for young people in particular to stay in their own countries rather than drowning in the Mediterranean or vegetating in camps that Pope Francis has described as concentration camps. For Southwest Asia, we propose the Oasis plan, which begins with canals between the Mediterranean, Red and Dead Seas, and the desalination of large quantities of seawater for desert irrigation, and ultimately the greening and economic development of all of Southwest Asia as the center of the ancient Silk Road between Asia, Africa, and Europe. Here too, cooperation between China and other BRICS countries with Europe and the countries of the region can implement the mandate of Pope Paul VI. The new name for peace is development. Pope Leo has also spoken of development as a weapon for lasting peace in the region. Today's conference of the Schiller Institute is the start of a campaign throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia to implement this program of joint ventures as a motor for overcoming the economic crisis and as a prospect for peace. And I am particularly pleased that we have gained the cooperation of the Chinese Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies, whose Vice President Daqi will address us in a video message. This type of cooperation to solve the most pressing problems facing humanity also corresponds to the mindset we need to put a new global security and development architecture on the agenda, one that takes into account the interests of every country on Earth. Only by realizing such a new paradigm in international relations can we escape the consequences of the far-reaching collapse of international law and international relations, which has resulted from the toleration of genocide in Gaza and the recent attacks on Iran, namely a general descent into anarchy. We have reached a punctum saliens in history, but nothing could be further from Schiller's reasoning than to understand this term fatalistically, quite the contrary. Very early on in his philosophical letters, Julius to Raphael, he wrote in 1786, quote, "There is a certain punctum saliens of reason where all concepts are reversed, where the soul flies beyond the data of the senses." End of quote. It is the moment of transition from fear to freedom. I and probably many other people have often asked myself how the German people, who have produced so many outstanding poets, thinkers, and inventors, could allow themselves to be deprived of their sovereignty in this way. Schiller showed the way out with his concept of the sublime. On the Sublime of 1793, he writes, quote, "There is a critical point where the power of nature oppresses the spirit just enough that it saves itself with a sudden leap into the sphere of freedom." End of quote. This moment is the punctum saliens, in which man struggles out of paralyzing fear to moral self-assertion. Throughout his life's work, Schiller grappled with this question of the sublime, of how man learns to act greater than circumstances seem to allow him to through aesthetic education. In a letter to Goethe, he wrote in January 1795, quote, "There is a punctum saliens in every art where the mechanical is transformed into the free, and this point must be found by genius." And in Grace and Dignity, he says that humans show dignity when they find the decisive moment of self-control in the conflict between duty and inclination. The punctum saliens is the revolutionary moment in history when we realize our humanity. We will therefore do everything in our power to honor our namesake and prove ourselves worthy of the beautiful image he had of humanity, I would like to conclude with a few lines from his fragment called German Greatness. That is not the greatness of the Germans, whether to conquer with the sword, to penetrate the realm of spirits, to struggle manfully with madness. That is worthy of his seal. A higher victory has been won by those who wield the lightning of truth, who liberate the spirits themselves to fight for freedom of reason, means justice for all peoples, and applies for all eternity.
That's Mr. Zepp-LaRouche for this sharp analysis and inspiring future perspective, especially also practical steps to study very soon. Oh, it's already online. Who is interested and can look at it. I'm honored now as the next speaker, Dr. Naledi Pandor. She wanted to be here personally, but for other reasons, that wasn't possible. But she is live available now about the Zoom link. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs and from South Africa. Have we her on the screen? Is she available?
Indeed, I am, Chairperson. Thank you very much. I hope that I'm audible. Dr. Zepp-LaRouche. Dr. Zepp-LaRouche, staff of the Schiller Institute.
Thank you, and Madame LaRouche. It's such an inspiring speech that I've just heard. Hope conference will do well in carrying out the ideas you have mentioned. So I hope the interpretation is okay, because I just now did not hear everything, but I hope this time with English into German it will work. I will make a few points concerning today's panel one topic, cooperation between BRICS and Europe to implement the Oasis plan and the Agenda 2063 for Africa. As we all know, today, I think the world of multipolarity is already there. It's a multipolar world. As we take BRICS as an example, its overall GDP by purchasing power parity is already much larger than G7, roughly close to 40% of the world's GDP, compared with 33% of G7. But we should work hard to really create this multipolar world order. I think our discussion today on this topic is part of this effort to build a kind of infrastructure, architecture, in the end, an order for this new type of multipolar world. It's not easy, but we have to try hard. Now, concerning BRICS and Europe, maybe I could focus on the troubled relations between China and Europe. Indeed, there are already some trilateral projects, China, Europe, Africa, in place. Some have been already completed. For instance, Madame LaRouche just mentioned this Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project, huge one. It's a success. But on the whole, we're not that optimistic. So far, what we see from the side of EU, it's deep-rooted mistrust. And for all kinds of reasons, from a Chinese point of view, Europe today is no longer that autonomous, not to mention independent. So become a kind of, even French President Macron mentioned a kind of vassal status to the United States. So they try to serve American interests rather than real European interests. For people outside Europe, it's so clear, it's so evident, it's a common sense. You are not independent. You're hurting your own interest. I'll give you an example. For instance, thanks to China's effort to make sure its own security, we have achieved energy self-sufficient rate of 85%. But in Europe, it's always around 40%. In Germany, it's below 40%. So for this kind of energy self-sufficiency level, you can tolerate this kind of bombing, destruction of the North Sea, and then no investigation. It's just a shame, you know. So this is unacceptable, and that, of course, undermine German industry, manufacturing sector, and Europe as a whole. Just a case of this example. But if you look at the Chinese BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, it's already an investment of over $1 trillion. Maybe 1/3 is for Africa. And China has built or upgraded over 10,000 kilometers of railways. And we have built over 100 ports for Africa. So this is infrastructure. Yet from the EU's perspective, it's about geopolitical rivalry, China versus Europe. From a Chinese point of view, it's very simple. There is a huge infrastructure index for Africa to develop. And China had this comparative advantage. So let's have a discussion with what we call the three togethers: discussing together, building together, benefiting together. So it's well received in Africa. And from a Chinese point of view, if we look at Europe, you know, at least two huge mistakes made by EU as a whole. One is this in the year 2011, when the Arab Spring occurred. We in China, me included, predict Arab Spring will become Arab Winter. It will undermine European interest and Western interest as well. So in the end, Arab Spring becoming Arab Winter, and this refugee crisis, which hurt so much European interests. And then if we look forward, and the second case is the rise of the African economy. This is good. It's on the whole positive. But another aspect we cannot ignore is this high population growth rate. In the 1950s, European population doubles African population. Now African population twice the size of European population. And in the coming years, it will be even higher. So you must create jobs in Africa and help Africa develop its own domestic industries. This is what China is doing for Africa. We're building actually a regional network of air, land, and whatever, regional system for Africa. In the past, if you want to travel from West Africa, say Ghana, to Kenya, East Africa, you have to go via London because it's a colonial system. It's all metropolis deciding everything. But China said, let's have African, Chinese philosophy, unite and prosper, not divide and rule. So let's build this regional transportation network based on principle of discussing together, building together, and benefiting together. It's working well, it's on the way. Yeah. So why not European companies do not join these projects? It's not about geopolitics, it's about one mankind. And also, we said, whatever, profiting together, this is fine, yeah. So it's really consensus. You are out of your own interest to join BRI, rather than, we force you, compel you to join this project, whether it's with regard to European companies, Russian companies, American companies, or African companies. It's a voluntary. So this is trouble really. Everything now is looked at through this geopolitical rivalry perspective, and from the so-called lens of democracy versus autocracy. I think it's extremely stupid. It's out of touch with the real world. Now, let's try to be a bit optimistic when we look into the future. At least what I'm thinking of what China has done and can do for Africa and maybe for other global South countries. Chinese philosophy is very much influenced by this tradition of what we call the can-do spirit, get things done. So I would say, China acts and EU or Europe talks. And for instance, Europe is known for debating and discussing, raising this whole idea of green transition, Green Deal, with a lot of fanfare. But in China, it's done. It's more or less completed. It's extremely good news for the whole world, for those who want to have cope with climate change. By the year 2024, last year, China achieved its objective of carbon reduction. It's called the CO2 emissions began to drop by 1.6% last year. While China economy is already the largest by purchasing power parity, has maintained the speed of growth roughly, roughly 5% a year. So it's the largest manufacturing industries and trading nation in the world. Yet we still managed to ensure that overall CO2 emission dropped. But the China government is very cautious. They did not announce that. they are saying because this is only 1.6%. So I'm not very sure, say by this year it will maintain or it will still be objectives, double carbon objectives. So it's by the 2030, we reverse this trend. And by the 2060, it's neutrality, carbon neutrality. So we are doing this very honestly in a down-to-earth spirit with one 5-year plan after another. So with this, what we can see is today China produces roughly 2/3 of solar panels, EV vehicles, and renewable energies for China and for the world as a whole. China became the largest exporter of EV cars. And as a result, indeed, today's climate, whatever, this whole battle against climate change may be possible with the Chinese model. And as in the first place, this whole, whatever, facilities, equipment needed for combating this whole climate change, made in China, it's affordable for Africa, for many other countries. So this is transformative, this game changer, it's revolutionary. But what we need is a collective will to do that. And the second good example I want to quote is the whole effort, I think Madame LaRouche mentioned several times, the Oasis plan, which Schiller Institute was already made available, advanced it back in the 1970s. Yet today, in terms of technologies and green financing for these fighting desertification in Africa or in the Middle East, from Chinese experience, can be achieved. I'll give an example. And China completed a huge desert reclamation project called the Taklamakan Desert. It's one of the largest deserts in the world. It's the size of Germany, the whole desert in Xinjiang. That's been encircled with a green belt. Huge effort. It's the effort of 46 years, continuous efforts. And within this green belt, we have what we call the photovoltaic farms, where millions of solar panels are installed to generate renewable energies. And underneath are drought-resistant vegetations. So Xinjiang, because this desert is in Xinjiang, Xinjiang now is one of the largest producers of grains and wheat and corn in China. Unbelievable success. Yeah. So the most ridiculous story in the Western media, including German media, is the story about Xinjiang. It's so ridiculous for Chinese. You can only laugh at it, you know. So we leave these medias in darkness. Whatever they do, every year at least 200 million visitors go to Xinjiang from China. So evident, on the whole, it's a very successful story. And this also means if we have a security structure in Africa, in Middle East, Chinese equipment, Chinese technologies, and the green finance, China is also doing very well, world's largest green financing market. We can work together, you know, put this Oasis plan into reality. And finally, I just want to say that behind this, what I call very important Chinese ideas. Of course, the most famous one is Xi Jinping's idea of building a one humanity, shared future for mankind. Rather than we reject categorically this American formula of on the table or in the menu. No, this is the world of wolf, yeah. It's not the real human world. And also the idea I mentioned, the Western idea is divide and rule, which is very stupid. We should promote unite and prosper. We do this at home within China over the past decades. Now we are promoting this idea to the whole world. So I think with all these hopefully positive news, we can make this conference a greater success. Thank you very much.
I only can advise you forget what you heard in the media about China, and see what Zhang Weiwei said. I'm very happy that Dr. Naledi Pandor is now online and will speak. I say again, she is the former. Oh, now I don't have sound right now.
Good morning.
I can say she's the former Foreign Minister of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm also the current and new chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And I wish to remind all delegates present in the meeting that on the 18th of July, it's Nelson Mandela International Day. And it is the day on which Nelson Mandela asked each one of us to devote 1 hour to doing something for another person or a needy community. So I hope all of you have plans for the 18th of July when you will honor the request of the late President Nelson Mandela, who asked only this one thing of all of us human beings. Allow me to begin by thanking Dr. Zepp-LaRouche and the team at the Schiller Institute for inviting me to participate in this very important Berlin conference. I regret that I'm unable to be physically present as I am currently in the United States of America. I believe this Berlin meeting is extremely important. For Africans, as you would know, the concept of a Berlin conference can be a frightening reminder of our colonial past and the 19th century role Berlin played in sanctioning colonialism. I therefore applaud the Schiller Institute for bringing the voice of freedom, justice, peace, and security to Berlin, and I hope that Berlin will take the lead in creating world conditions in the globe that are a counterweight to the current hostile environment that has been created by the most powerful in the world. The Schiller Institute has taken on a very important task of generating fresh and informed conversations about our world today. All of you present here are aware that we are at or near the tipping point as the global community, particularly with respect to the possible eruption of an unmanageable global conflict, a global war, or indeed a trade war that will cause immense harm, particularly to developing countries. The Institute's initiative for building an international peace coalition is going to be an important contributor to the development of a new global partnership and a fresh approach to multilateralism. I wish to affirm that as South Africa and many countries on the African continent, we firmly believe in a multipolar world. And we believe multilateralism is most appropriately supported through an efficient, effective, and reformed United Nations, particularly its Security Council, which has to play its role of ensuring peace and security. The continent of Africa supports all initiatives for peace. Peace is good. Peace is very closely associated with development. Our continent, Africa, remains challenged by poor of industrialization, by poor manufacturing capacity, and by the absence of technology innovation for adding value to Africa's rich natural resources. In addition, Africa suffers from internecine conflicts, a lack of democracy in many countries, and weak human rights practices, as well as public institutions that cannot execute a public service role efficiently. All of these add to the significant problems that Africa has. But fortunately, Africa has begun to focus on solutions. Digital technologies and innovation are finding roots in African economies, such as Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. Increased investment in agriculture and basic social services, such as health and education, are also supporting significant progress. In my view, the most important African Union-led Agenda 2063 for the Africa we want. Agenda 2063 provides an implementable framework for the development of Africa, an Africa that all Africans desire by 2063. Our African Union is steering and leading implementation of this agenda and is seeking partnerships with international collaborators to assure that we achieve implementation of the 17 priority initiatives set out in Agenda 2063. The conflict in Sudan, as well as the delayed return to democracy in several West African states, has delayed notable progress on our Agenda 2063. But despite this, it is a blueprint that enjoys wide currency on the African continent. The Oasis plan that has been published by the Schiller Institute complements the aspirations of Africa, and there should be collaboration in implementing these development plans, and in our view, Europe can play an extremely important role in such collaboration. Furthermore, both the Oasis Plan and Agenda 2063 link very neatly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All of these development plans should be the focus of the global community, and it is most concerning that current global discourse does not refer at all to development. Current discourse is very masculine, it's very conflict directed, and it is totally at odds with the SDGs, with Africa's Agenda 2063, and with the Oasis Plan. It is vital for delegates at this conference to find ways of reaching out to world leaders, leaders that are part of the G7, that are part of BRICS, that are part of G20. And in one voice, we should gather sufficient momentum to persuade these leaders that more growth, more development, and more security would be achieved if these plans became the core of global action. We need to make it clear to world leaders that we expect them to move away from the current trajectory and to give dedicated attention to a focus on global development. The negative and toxic geopolitical environment in which military power and economic bullying are dominant will never contribute to building a better world. Efforts at securing global cooperation need to be intensified, and increased attention to building respect for multilateralism, respect for international law, are the only routes to creating a world in which inequality, poverty, and exclusion could be addressed. These three problematique are the key focal areas the global community should unite on. The conference that you're holding today needs to arrive at Berlin conclusions that affirm collaboration, that support investment in the vulnerable and marginalized, and conclusions that strongly reject conflict and increased militarism. I hope that the deliberations you have today will set a new agenda for the global community and will begin a process of turning countries away from the attitude of seeking to destroy each other. We have seen reversals due to the conflictual environment in our progress with gender equality, in our progress with non-racism, in our progress with development. It is thus urgently necessary for all of us in the global community to join together in creating a world that is more just, that is peaceful, and that is focused on ensuring all have a livelihood and all can enjoy development. I am sure that it is possible for these objectives to be pursued. From the history of South Africa in the combating of apartheid, it has been proven beyond any doubt that the global community can come together in international solidarity to combat an evil, a crime against, ensure that all persons enjoy freedom and justice. The world assisted South Africa in the international anti-apartheid movement to achieve freedom after many decades. The world can join together today to create a foundation for securing peace, justice, and development for those who do not enjoy these rights. We need to change the focus of the world toward positive ends. And the work being led by Dr. Zepp-LaRouche, as well as the team at the Schiller Institute, is providing us with a clear basis for pursuing the objectives I have referred to. I hope you will join the Schiller Institute in this important endeavor, and I look forward to seeing the conclusions for a massive growth in the International Peace Coalition and for us from country to country defining how we will act to ensure that we positively impact on world affairs today. I thank you for listening to me, and I wish you well in your conference deliberations. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Wir können wirklich sehr froh sein, dass wir eine so bedeutende Stimme Afrikas und weit darüber hinaus für die Menschheit hier gewonnen haben. Ich möchte als Redner ankündigen, mein Freund Hans von Sponeck, ehemaliger Beigeordneter UN-Generalsekretär. Er wollte auch persönlich kommen und dann hat ihm seine Ärztin einen Strich durch die Rechnung gemacht.
I'm announcing Hans von Sponeck, Hans-Christof von Sponeck. He cannot travel right now, but he's here at Zoom. He was a coordinator for the UN humanitarian help in Iraq, and his topic is the challenges in international relations. I'm looking forward to meeting you, to listening to you.
Aber in Englisch. Ja, dann müssen wir das hier umstellen.
Da musst du draufklicken.
First, I want to thank for the invitation to this important conference. I'm thankful for that, and for the theme of this, the theme of the conference. I want to say this: we live in a time of perhaps the greatest geopolitical divide when it comes to creating a humane and dignified world order. The dream of Yalta in 1945, that great dream to put wars behind us and replace bilateral aggression with multilateral cooperation was short-lived. It has been replaced by a nightmare of fear. I don't find a better word. A nightmare of fear, uncertainty, and confrontation. All that remains of the dream is the Charter of the United Nations with its timeless ethics and profound vision for all billion citizens of our world. The many international wars and national conflicts that have occurred worldwide since the creation of the UN testify without any question that the political UN as a legislative body, especially the Security Council, has remained largely incapable of fulfilling its peace mandate. I don't say this lightly, that a major reason for that is that the US, in pursuing its global geopolitical interests through a unilateralist foreign policy, the US has used its military and economic power, both within the United Nations as well as elsewhere, at its own discretion, not in accordance with the principles of the rule of law and multilateralism. This pattern of behavior is, for me, the only plausible explanation for both the turbulence in international relations and the often disappointing, certainly disappointed performance of the United Nations. May I ask you, please, may these be accepted as a serious fact and not as any ideological statement. The multilateral construction site for a new, peaceful, and just world order is truly enormous. It is about the geographical adjustment of a Security Council that has become unrepresentative. It is about a reformed application of the veto. It is about cooperation between the General Assembly as the majority of states and the Security Council as the minority of states. It is about the existing insufficient authority of the General Assembly as the principle of the Security Council. It is about also the independence, and I say this as someone who has worked 32 years in this organization. It is about the independence of the work of the Secretary General and the specialized agencies and their protection against bilateral interference. It is about, year after year, about the financing of the UN. I want to say here, the UN is cheap. The yearly budget of the UN Secretary General for this year, 2025, is $3.7 billion. Sounds a lot, but fact is, and that is not more, that's no than 46 cents per every citizen of the world. This is that cheap is the UN. And don't forget, as I said, as also by Dr. Pandor, it is about a new and just international economic order, which since a long time from the non-Western countries has been called for, and by the OECD, the rich industry countries, has been not accepted. And the important word I want to say, it's in short, it is about how to believe. It is about make the UN system more democratic, and that the members that they are obliged to fulfill international law, and that finally there will be consequences when they don't fulfill that work. Already since 70 years, this should have been discussed. In September, the so-called Pact for the Future was finally adopted last September at a special summit of the General Assembly. The current geopolitical situation may be an indication that the road to a new world order, the long road, and the creation of a reformed UN that meets the needs of humanity. And this is what it's all about. Needs of all people, wherever they live, will be long run. This will be also a dangerous road with many obstacles, potholes, and landmines. It is encouraging, therefore, that the UN General Assembly nevertheless seems determined to follow this path. A majority of states and non-governmental organizations are simply no longer willing, and thanks God, no longer willing to accept a Western-centric world. Here, this is some light, a valuable international toolbox is ready and waiting, containing almost everything needed for a comprehensive transformation. What do I mean with that? There is long-standing experience in all fields of human knowledge in the UN, as well as it's in specialized agencies, as in other multilateral and national institutions that have been involved in building institutions for renewable, peaceful, inclusive, and just development, or have worked on reforms of international financial structures, which exist since a long time. No one takes care of good proposals. There are also climate change scientists, this is rarely said, and experts in traditional and local knowledge, which was just ignored since a very short time. The UN Charter and the two covenants on political, civil, economic, social, and cultural rights and other international law are valuable guides for the future. But I want to emphasize this. There is something decisive, very decisive, without which there will be no new world order nor a reformed UN. The political will of the major powers to unanimously commit themselves to a future multilateralism. And I emphasize human. This world which is even for an optimist like me, it is difficult to believe in this better future. Nevertheless, the key to reform has been forged by the UN Pact. The apocalyptic dangers lurking in the world, such as climate change, nuclear weapons, pandemics, artificial intelligence, and migration, because of crisis, persecution, and poverty. These are all global challenges. And I think this is important to emphasize, that affect all 193 UN member states without exception. So here is a one-time opportunity, I would say, for a community of survival with the noble aim, peace on the world, to get closer to peace. Through cooperation, it would be possible to develop the multilateral team spirit, which right now does not exist at all, needed to build an alliance of United Nations, the United Nations. To create something new means to put up resistance. To resist is to create something new. The great Frenchman Stéphane Hessel, who said this, must not be forgotten. Thank you very much.
In the end, I want to announce a book that Hans von Sponeck has written together with. Sorry, I cannot hear him. The next speaker, it will be the well-known analyst, Dmitri Trenin. He's the leader, he's supervisor of the Institute of World Military Economy and Strategy at the Higher School of Economics University in Moscow. I hope you can hear us all. We are looking forward to your title, a new global security system.
Give a huge thanks to the Schiller Institute, to Dr. Zepp-LaRouche for inviting me to this conference. I would love to talk about peace and development and many other uplifting issues. But in the last few weeks, the world has experienced crises, one of which is still ongoing, involving nuclear powers. One in South Asia, one in the Middle East, and the third one in Europe, in Ukraine, but not essentially over Ukraine. One of the most striking revelations of 2025, not just for me, but for many of my colleagues here in Moscow, has been Europe moving toward the front line of the conflict in Ukraine and turning itself into the main adversary, a near enemy on the battlefield for Russia in the West's proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. In my view, this is a result of two developments. One is Russia beginning to win the war in Ukraine. The other one is the United States under the Trump administration deprioritizing Europe to focus more on Asia, essentially on China. In this new environment, the analysis of my colleagues and myself goes, Europe's leaders found it useful to cast Russia into the role of the enemy at the gate as the main vehicle for further consolidation of Europe into a power center, into a strategic actor. And standing up to Russia has been elevated to the almost to the new unifying idea for Europe. After achieving peace among European nations, after the Second World War, after the unification of Europe, rather absorption of Eastern Europe into a greater European Union, the current grand idea of European integration seems to be standing up to the barbarians in the East. This notion is based on the, in my view, ludicrous assumption that Russia is poised to attack Europe in the medium-term future, next 3 to 5 years. You don't ask where this sort of intelligence comes from, because even asking that question could put you into the position of, into the category of a Putin agent. But this is widely accepted among the normally critically minded people of Europe. From the Russian side, it looks like Europe is not only talking about potential Russian aggression in the medium-term future, is not busy deterring that aggression, but actually is preparing to fight against Russia in the next 3 to 5 years. This is different from the Cold War period, when I think the emphasis was very much on the Cold War confrontation. Today, the situation is much more dynamic and thus much more dangerous. And I think that this is being taken with more and more concern in Russia, because, as I said, this comes as a revelation. For decades during the Cold War and even after the Cold War, Europe was seen more or less as a group of vassals to the United States, countries that have become totally pacifist or near pacifist, that they were only serving the interests of the United States. This notion is being revised across the board in Russia. As I said, Europe is now in the front line, is in the historical position, unfortunately, of a group of countries that are preparing for military engagement with Russia. So Europe's involvement into the war continues to grow. Europe is replacing the United States as the main purveyor of arms and munitions to Kiev. It is upgrading the systems it has been transferring to Kiev, and that would include long-range missiles, also from Germany. So essentially, Europe is getting nearer and nearer to directly participating in a war with Russia. And people are also talking about European troops being potentially sent into Ukraine, despite the many, not only protests, but warnings from Russia that this was intolerable and would constitute a very dangerous act. So we are deeply struck also me included, because I spent a lot of time in Germany in the 70s and the 80s, and have been visiting the country many times. Have a lot of good colleagues and many friends in Germany. But it gives me enormous pain to state that the Russian-German reconciliation, which was almost a miracle, given that it was achieved outside of any alliances or economic unions, and that it essentially began to happen when at least West Germany and the Soviet Union were on the opposite sides of the Cold War divide. That this reconciliation that was cemented by Moscow's acceptance of and actually support for Germany's reunification 35 years ago, that this reconciliation is no more. It's in tatters, and it's a tragedy in my view. Something that I personally hailed as a miracle, that was totally incredible. One of the things that you cannot expect to happen. It did happen, but then it became undermined progressively. I would say over the past 20 years, it has been undermined, and then it sank before our very eyes. Let me conclude by saying that we find ourselves at a very European leaders, if I may call them that way, would delude themselves in thinking that Russia will not respond, at least not retaliate against themselves, against the European powers, for what they are doing in Ukraine and the weapons that they are sending to Ukraine to hit Russia. Let me also say that this point is more dangerous. The point that we're going through is more dangerous than almost anything else we've seen during the Cold War. And I would say that it's more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And one of the predictions that I hope we can still avert, I hope we can still make sure that it doesn't happen, that this present crisis will not stop until and unless we look into the abyss like they did in 1962 and step back from that. But unlike in 1962, the new nuclear crisis that could put in question the continued existence of much of the world, if not the entire world, will not happen over there, will not happen in the Caribbean or anywhere else. It looks like it is going to happen unless in this 11th hour we mount a joint effort to achieve an agreement that will stick, an agreement that will stabilize the situation in Europe's east. Finally, let me say that things could have been averted. This crisis would have never happened, but for NATO's enlargement reaching Ukraine, and I would say initially also Georgia. The idea that Ukraine would become a member of NATO. That was the real red line that led to this war. The crisis in Ukraine could have been prevented or could have been stopped in its tracks, and the situation could have been could have been stabilized had the Minsk agreement of 2015, 10 years ago, been honored by all parties. But this agreement, as Frau Merkel confided into us some time ago, was seen as simply a means to win time for Ukraine's rearmament. We could have stopped the war that began on a large scale in 2022 had the Istanbul draft treaty been signed, but in fact it was torpedoed by the joint efforts of the United States and the United Kingdom. We haven't used the 3 chances, so it may be that God has run out of chances to give us. But I still hope that we can avoid the worst. Let me leave you with that hope. But the situation is really dire. Thank you very much. And apologies for bringing a lot of dark clouds to the horizon of the Schiller conference. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Trenin. You don't have to apologize for talking about the dangers that we face. But I think many people in Germany and Europe, and especially the people here at our conference, they will never stop the contact, friendship with Russia. And now we have a speech from China, which was sent in by Mr. Daqi. He's a member of the organization with which the Schiller Institute now has a joint venture for studies. The video is in Chinese, but it has English subtitles. And of course, we will have then translation. Just he's vice president of the president for contemporary China.
尊敬的各位嘉宾、各位朋友，大家好，我是当代中国与世界研究院范大奇，很荣幸参加席勒研究院举办的为国际关系开辟新范式的国际研讨会，与在座各位分享当代中国与世界研究院同席勒研究院的联合研究报告内容构想和未来双方拟开展的合作事项。2025年5月6号，中国国家主席习近平同欧洲理事会主席科斯塔、欧盟委员会主席冯德莱恩互致贺电，热烈庆祝中国和欧盟建交50周年。习近平主席指出，中国和欧盟是全面战略合作伙伴，也是推动多极化的两大力量，支持全球化的两大市场，倡导多样性的两大文明。中欧关系已经成为世界上最具影响力的双边关系之一，为增进中欧人民福祉、促进世界和平和发展做出了重要贡献。习近平主席高度重视中欧关系发展。面向未来，习近平主席强调，中欧双方要坚持多边主义，携手应对全球性挑战，共同推动平等有序的世界多极化和普惠包容的经济全球化，为世界的和平、稳定、发展、繁荣做出更大贡献。欧盟领导人也表示，欧盟和中国建立起广泛联系，成为彼此最重要的贸易伙伴，为双方人民福祉和经济发展繁荣做出贡献。在当前全球不稳定性和地缘政治变化的背景下，欧盟愿同中国深化伙伴关系，加强交往合作，维护联合国宪章宗旨原则，携手应对共同挑战，促进世界和平、安全、繁荣和可持续发展。由中欧领导人的发言可以看出，双方在关涉中欧合作、关涉全球治理的诸多领域均有广泛共识。为使双方全方位的合作走深走实， 中欧智库应该加强协同协作，加强智慧分享，为共同应对全球性挑战和紧迫性问题提供解决方案。正是在此背景下，当代中国与世界研究院作为以连接中外、沟通世界为己任的专业智库，我们看到了与席勒研究院就一些国际问题的研究方向存在着广泛的共识。基于此，当代中国与世界研究院同席勒研究院合作开展了主题为中欧经贸合作的联合研究，以期抓住中欧发展的历史性机遇，拓展中欧经贸合作思路，共同应对外部风险，促进中欧经贸关系向好发展，为维护全球经济和贸易秩序贡献智慧与力量。联合研究报告将从中欧经贸合作的基础、中欧经贸合作特色亮点、中欧经贸合作的全球意义、中欧非三方合作空间和中欧经贸合作未来展望5部分展开。经初步研究，我们认为在全球化遭遇逆流、单边保护主义抬头的今天，中欧经贸合作已超越双边关系范畴，成为稳定世界经济、维护多边贸易体系、保障产业链供应链安全、引领数字革命以及推动全球治理的关键力量。相关详细内容，敬请各位专家期待拟于9月下旬举行的具体发布工作。同时，为促进当代中国与世界研究院和席勒研究院的长期合作，双方拟于近期正式签署合作备忘录，建立共同研究信息共享机制，加强双方在学术研究及传播领域的务实合作。后续双方还将围绕中德关系、中欧关系、全球治理、人类命运共同体理念、3大全球倡议、一带一路国际合作、古典学研究、数字科技、现代化进程、清洁能源、全球减贫事业发展等课题，以及中欧在第三方市场，特别是非洲地区的发展合作，开展联合研究，携手为完善全球治理贡献智慧力量。女士们、先生们、朋友们，中欧关系的定位是伙伴，主流基调是合作，关键价值是自主，发展前景是共赢。相信我们与席勒研究院的联合研究成果将推动政府、高校、企业、民众多方对话合作提供新思路、新方案。中欧携手必将会共同开辟下一个更加坚韧自主、更加成熟稳定、更加目光远大的50年。谢谢大家。
We have a guest who came from far away, a legend, Ray McGovern. For 27 years, he was an analyst for the CIA. He briefed a number of American presidents. He on the Soviet media every morning for the morning briefing. That's why he speaks Russian too. But since he resigned from that function, he is an activist who fights for peace. He's a member of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, which are whistleblowers from the intelligence community who are trying to change the policy. We're happy that he's here. He's been for a week in Germany, had 100,000 meetings. So, Ray McGovern. Professionals for Sanity, which are whistleblowers.
Thank you very much. Can I be heard? I can. Good. Well, I have some good news. We've had enough bad news, haven't we? And die gute Nachricht. Day before yesterday, Rubio met with Lavrov. You know who they are. And Rubio reported to the press, wow, Lavrov gave me some new and interesting, some things that were a different approach to Ukraine. It was sort of amazing. It was sort of like a step-by-step, sort of a map toward negotiation. And so I'm going to tell the president about that, says Rubio. I'm going to tell the president. Wow. Well, that was the first time the two met for a couple of months, but this is good news. Now, yesterday, when Lavrov gave one of his par excellence press conferences, he was asked this question, and I wrote it down here so I wouldn't misquote him. Here's the question. Mr. Rubio said yesterday that there was a new plan about Ukraine and that was discussed with you, Mr. Lavrov. What are these new approaches? End quote. Lavrov. I'd like to respond with the words of US President Donald Trump. Quote, I will tell you, expect big surprises, end quote. Tongue way in cheek. Lavrov continues. Now, I don't know about big surprises. You press people are familiar with diplomatic negotiations, and you know that these are not things that are easily or a very good idea to discuss in the present. And so I will just respond by saying, yes, we discussed Ukraine. Well, is this room for hope? Well, I think we need to divide Trump into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for those, okay? And it does a disservice to everyone to have such a Trump derangement syndrome that you can't see that he wants to put an end to the war in Ukraine, and so does Putin. Hello, this is a big deal. Now, I detest anyone who enables genocide, Völkermord, anyone who would attack another country, as Trump did recently in a war of aggression against Iran. My colleague, Elizabeth Murray, will talk more about Gaza. I can't talk about Gaza without getting very, very angry, and it doesn't help to be Irish. So what I'd like to do is try to segregate out what we can look at as possible progress. And I think that Putin is doing precisely the same. I think what he's doing is saying, look, we don't have any options about new presidents. We have 3 more years of this fellow. He says he wants to talk to us. We are talking, and that is big. Not only the 2 of us at the summit level, but also our foreign ministers and others. My God. Now, why is that so unusual? Because it didn't happen for 4 years, for Pete's sake. 4 years almost, okay? So this is the good news. Now, what about the other news? The other news has to do with what the old Soviets used to call, several of you will remember that have hair this color, the world correlation of forces. Now, the world correlation of forces has changed. In case you didn't notice, the US used to be the superpower. Now there are 2 other superpowers. And guess what? It's 2 against 1. Now, we are aware that the Chinese are especially careful when they say, yes, we have this strategic agreement with Russia, but it's not against anybody. It's not a military alliance. And of course, the Russians say the same thing. But my goodness, when you have a common enemy, when you have a common major power that is threatening you both. I mean, hello, it doesn't take an analyst to figure out what to emphasize there. So what I'm saying is this, that yesterday we were talking to a group that included a Chinese general. And I mentioned all this. I said, it's 2 against 1, isn't it? Oh, no, that's no. And then I raised this point here, which I read in something called the Executive Intelligence Review. Are you familiar with that? A fellow named Jason Ross, whom I know. And, you know, when I read that in the morning, I'm usually pretty well educated. And if I can find it here, what he said was, look, the Chinese are saying that we're going to be next. Do we fear a Russian loss in Ukraine? Of course we do. We don't think it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But why do we support it rhetorically or with all kinds of economic help? Well, because we know we're going to be next. Well, if you know you're going to be next, my God, that's 2 against 1, despite all the rhetoric. You know, we talk about Westphalia and everything else, but the Chinese have changed their approach to the real world, emphasizing core interests, not rhetoric. Now, what I'd like to do is finish up quickly because I'm only allowed 10 minutes. And I just want to mention something that is near and dear to my heart. This has been a very informative symposium so far, and imagine it will get even more informative. A lot of rain has been predicted and has been falling even outside earlier this morning, and I'm going to invoke a special principle. It's called the Noah principle. And it's this, pay attention. It's on the final exam, so if you want to write it down, take out your pen. Okay. Here it is, the Noah principle. No more awards for predicting rain. Awards only for building arks. In other words, we can have all the knowledge we want. We can know exactly what we should do, but if we don't do it, we're not facing up to the criticality of this situation. Traveling through Germany for the first time in maybe 7 or 8 years, I was really impressed by a lot of things. I want to go back to one thing that I forgot to point out because it's consonant with everything that else has been said here. Back in 1990, when James Baker, our Secretary of State, a very smart Texas lawyer, sold a bill of goods to Gorbachev and Shevardnadze and said, look, you know, we'd really like to see a reunified Germany. Now, I don't know if there are many Russians here, but I just wonder what the reaction was by Gorbachev and Shevardnadze. Yeah, what's the quid for this pro, or what's the pro for this quid? Oh, well, we promise not to move NATO 1 inch to the east. The reason I mention that is because I had a personal experience with this. I was in Moscow about 12 years ago, and I met one of Gorbachev's main assistants. His name is Kuvaldin. He was on the delegation there talking with Baker and everybody else, and his picture is readily available. And I said, Mr. Kuvaldin, tell me, why did you not get that promise written down? He looked at me and he said, look, I'll give you the 2 answers. Germany hadn't finally bought in. They bought it the next day, right? Okay. But also the Warsaw Pact still existed. And, you know, what are we going to do about that? But really, Mr. McGovern, this is what it really was. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, we trusted you. Wow. Now, there's bad news and there's good news here. There's lots of reasons for all the betrayals, and I'll call them betrayals. Minsk has been mentioned, James Baker has been mentioned, Istanbul has been mentioned, and despite all that, and this is the real analytical conclusion I would draw, Putin still says, look, I was naive. Putin said that. I was naive in trusting these people, but with Biden gone, I think I can trust Trump, oh my God, I think he's sincere about making peace in Ukraine. Now, what I would suggest as I end this little talk is that we keep aware, that we be aware and keep this awareness up front, that Trump may do a lot of crazy things, but we should react like Lavrov, We make a little fun, Oh, this is going to be really big. This will be huge, what I'm going to say. Just wait, it's going to be great. So we have to sort of take a little lighter touch to this and just make sure that people know that there is possibilities on Ukraine, and we need to encourage those. On the Middle East, we just have to follow our consciences, and those who have consciences left need to oppose with every ounce of their strength. How do we do this? Why do we do this? We do this because there is only us. And the story I was going to adduce from my travels through Germany this time was simply after the war, there was near Hamburg, there was a little Pfarrgemeinde. The church was zerstört, everything was really destroyed. And the people worked for 3 years to put together the church and the crucifix, okay? And finally, the Saturday before they were going to have the big öffnung, the big rededication, the head of the Gemeinde said to the pastor, I'm sorry, we found the corpus for the crucifix, but we can't find the hands. They must have been really destroyed. I said, no problem, we go ahead, we start tomorrow, we rededicate. And when they looked in the church, many of you may have heard this. They looked at the crucifix with the corpus and no hands. Underneath was this. Ich habe keine Hände außer deinen. Das genügt.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern, for these insights. Now we have the calling question. We have several members who are online. This is Mr. Patrick Lumumba from Kenya. Do we have the technicians?
Fantastisch.
Lumumba doesn't have his video on. No, it's true. I'm glad that you are online here. I only saw music from my TikTok videos. And I heard passionate speeches about the sovereignty of Africa. So therefore, I am delighted that you are live here, that you are a participant of this conference. You also have worked as a secretary of the African Commission. We are happy to listen to your contribution.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the organizers. I've had the advantage of listening to a number of presentations. And for that reason, I'll be very brief. I will not repeat what has been said, but I'll speak from the standpoint of the continent of Africa. I've listened to speakers that talk about Africa as if she were one country, homogeneous. And yet we all know that Africa is divided into 54 sovereign states, with a number of others seeking to be recognized. We also know that those 54 states continue to labor under the neo-colonial project through institutions such as the Commonwealth for former British colonies, La Francophonie for the former French colonies, the Organization of Portuguese Countries for former Portuguese colonies. We are also aware that the United States of America after the World War II has been a hegemon in terms of dictating politics and economics through institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. We are also aware that there are new entrants into the African scene, such as China, who are engaging in economic activities, but also playing very subtle diplomacy. We are also aware of the Russians who are increasingly becoming influential in the continent of Africa. The Emiratis are also present. And of course, Daqi is also present. So that as I speak to you now, there is a new scramble for Africa. It is a scramble that has a deja vu effect. It is almost as if Berlin is happening again, 1884, 1885. The only reason and the only difference now is that the language is sugar-coated and may very well lull Africa into a false sense of security. And I therefore hope that when we have engagements such as these, the raison d'etre of these engagements is actually to ensure that Africa is given its due place in the scheme of things. But I do not blame the world. Part of the problem that we have in Africa diplomatically, economically, and politically is co-authored by Africa. We remain divided, and therefore we are weak. We are susceptible to manipulation, and Africa remains a playground for all the players that I have identified. I hope that the Schiller Institute, by midwifing this engagement, is going into a space where Africa is going to occupy her pride of place, which requires that Africa defines herself. We don't define ourselves. Our institutions are weak. Our regional bodies are weak. SADC in South Africa is weak. ECOWAS in West Africa is weak. Economic Community of West Africa, East Africa is weak. Central Africa is weak. The Maghreb is weak. The African Union is weak and financed by outsiders. It is in that weakness that the strength of other players is manifest. So when we sit here, we may be nice to each other, but the reality is that there is a scramble. There were days when Africa was forced, and there were days when Africa was compelled to either identify with the former Soviet Union, and where African leaders were assassinated when it was assumed that they were communists. Patrice Lumumba suffered that fate in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kwame Nkrumah suffered that fate by way of being overthrown in 1966 in Ghana. Sylvanus Olympio suffered that fate in 1963 in Togo. Amilcar Cabral, Ahmed Ben Bella. And when Africa therefore joined with others in those early days to form the non-aligned movement, it was an attempt for Africa to liberate herself from the two hegemons at that time, the Soviet Union and the conceptual West, led by the United States of America. The non-aligned movement led by Sukarno of Indonesia, Nehru of India, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Tito of Yugoslavia, and Nkrumah of Ghana, was we neither look east nor west, but we know that all those were torpedoed. So that as I speak to you now, what ought to be done, and I can't agree with the previous speaker, Ray McGovern, who said, we know what ought to be done. The world is a forest of treaties and resolutions. The world is a forest of protocols. The world is a forest of diplomatic niceties. But only a few days ago, those of you who listened must have seen the President of the United States of America condescendingly treating 5 African heads of state even talking to them as a high school master would to a child, your English is so good. That is the manner in which Africans are treated. So through this forum, we must ask ourselves, if we talk about multipolarity, it is necessary, but what kind of multipolarity? Is it the substitution of erstwhile hegemons by others? One stabbing you while grinning, another one stabbing you while smiling, but stabbing you nevertheless? I urge this audience and the Schiller Institute to confront these issues. And I urge those who are from the African continent, the time is now that we must liberate ourselves. Nowadays, when I hear terms such as democracy, I ask myself, who is the democracy? Who defines democracy for us? I rather talk about governance. Shouldn't we rethink governance? When I hear about human rights, and I see how the decisions of the International Court of Justice are ignored by Israel, I wonder what human rights. When I look at the ICC created under the Statute of Rome, dealing with individuals who perpetrated international crimes, and I see Tony Blair still walking free after what they did in Iraq, I ask myself, what international justice is there? The time is now for the world to speak the truth and for Africa to engage the world, acutely aware that international relationship is still governed by the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest and the death of the least suitable. I hope that my mother continent, Africa, will give practical meaning to Africa Agenda 2063, will give practical meaning to Africa Continental Free Trade Area, will then engage with the world from a position of strength. I hope that even as we celebrate BRICS, let us ask ourselves, who will be the hegemon in BRICS? Will it be China? Will it be India? Will it be Brazil with African countries playing the gooseberry? These are uncomfortable questions, but they must be posed and answered. I beg. We are in a space where it behooves us to re-examine the institutions created after the World War II. Remember the charter in 1945 in San Francisco came into being when no African country was independent. We were not there. Liberia may have been independent, but weak. Ethiopia may have been independent, but weak. We were not there. The institutions of the United Nations were there and were created, and it creates inequality. All African countries and the rest of the world can vote all they want, but the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom can neutralize all our votes. It is a world of unequals. The Bretton Woods institution created in 1944, which now run roughshod over the continent of Africa, were not meant to deal with Africa. They keep us in a state of perpetual servitude through debts that are designed not to be payable. The time is now for the mother continent to engage with the world from a position of strength. I hope that the Schiller Institute will ensure that future engagements are engagements which are not mere jamborees, but are designed to distill issues that deserve to be dealt with and dealt with firmly for the sake of humanity. Thank you very much.
Wir hatten noch einen Redner erwartet aus Südafrika.
We were expecting another speaker from South Africa, Dr. Kwame Amour, but unfortunately he was refused a visum to attend. The other speaker, Abbey Makoe, is apparently not online. So we start our podium. I'm asking those who are here in the room, Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche, Ray McGovern, and then our friend Dave from the Technic will put in Professor Trenin, Herr von Sponeck, and Patrice Lumumba. This and Dr. Pandor. It will be a mix of German and English, and I hope that the translation will not get confused.
Gehen alle Mikrofone? Können Sie uns hören?
So are all the microphones functioning? Can you hear us? So I would like to ask Helga to address and give us her comments on what she has heard today. I'm very happy about these contributions. I think they give a good panorama of the situation in the world.
Können wir Übersetzung bekommen für Professor Zhang? Eine Sekunde.
I think the seriousness of the situation was addressed by Dr. Trenin very pregnantly, but unfortunately he's not in this discussion now. His assessment that this is as serious as the Cuba crisis, but I'm also happy that Dr. Zhang brought the Chinese optimism into Germany, because that is what we're lacking most in Germany. And Ray McGovern has brought in the humor, the sense of humor, to survive the seriousness of the. And then we have what Professor Lumumba said. There's no question that the major players, including in Europe, and this is exactly my personal experience, and I'm very happy for what Dr. Pandor said, because it's my conviction that the hope that she's putting at us, I'm hopeful that we can get serious, that we I think this can function. Professor Zhang said China could build the Oasis plan. We have demonstrated that we can do it. In the Taklamakan desert, which is probably the most impressive desert in the world that I know. They have dunes of 200 meters high that are moving from one day to the next. And to build some economic development in such conditions is really a large achievement. So I don't want to have a large, long speech like Castro. I'm quite optimistic that this conference can create a milestone in that respect. Dr. Zhang, you're addressed when Mrs. LaRouche says that the Chinese optimism is very positive for us, but it's not unfounded optimism, but you said we have a physical basis for doing that. And China is a co-founder of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. China has a special relation to Africa. The foreign minister always visits first Africa. And so you can comment on what was said, including what the African friends said.
Microphone. Well, let me continue a bit with Chinese optimism. Good. Is it okay? Okay. As I often describe China as a civilizational state, which means it's a continuous civilization for over 5,000 years. And China was first unified in 221 BC. And since then, in most cases, China was a unified country. So as a civilizational state, you have gone through many ups and downs. You have seen everything. And why Chinese nation can be again re-emerge had to do with this strong sense of optimism. So today, if you look at the relation between China and ASEAN, Southeast Asia, 10 nations, compare this with Europe or EU with the United States. I remember back in 2 years ago, the Munich Security Conference report was entitled Lose-Lose. And I read that report. In fact, it's not lose-lose for all, it's lose-lose for Europe. Yeah. Europe lost peace, lost independence, lost many, lost prosperity, whatever. But in Asia, it's on the whole, it's far more win-win than lose-lose. Just look at China and ASEAN. The past 5 decades is the longest continuous period of peace, stability, and development. Of course, difference is the major powers, China and United States. China respects strictly sovereignty, neutrality, and centrality of ASEAN. That's their key position: independence, centrality, and neutrality. So China accepts their code for non-nuclear free zone, nuclear weapon free zone, and Treaty of Amity, etc. And that's in the political domain. In the economic domain, in the case of China and ASEAN, both sides think economic and development pillar is foundational for everything else, for everything. So why Chinese are influenced by Marxism, German citizen. So economics is foundational. So we talk about security in broad sense, economic security, food security, energy security. With this basis, China has moved, fortunately, up in this whole new industrial revolution. And as a result, what you see is, as I mentioned, China became a leader in renewable energies, etc. And all these also play a very important role for security matters. Malacca Strait is no longer that important for China, to be honest. Yeah. So these are revolutionary. So that's why I think, if you look at the size of China ASEAN, it's 3 times of the population of Europe. It's 2 billion people. If we can achieve that with 2 billion people, why not Europe with only 1/3 of its population here? And furthermore, I think, maybe Asia
represents the hope to help the world to avoid the Third World War. Yeah. Because China as a civilizing state will make very clear we will not be the first to use nuclear weapons. We will not use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states. We are against any use of even technical nuclear weapons over Ukrainian crisis. That's very important Chinese position, and Ukrainians appreciate that. Yeah, and so this is already very important. Even you might be aware there is a problem between China and the Philippines, but China have up to now only used water cannons, not firing a single shot. Of course, even one destroyer from China can destroy the Filipino Navy within less than 24 hours. But we don't do that. Because we know as a civilized state, Filipino politics goes ups and downs. This president against China, next China friendly. So we will have a longer view. So the key difference between China and the United States is for the United States and West in general, the philosophy is friend or foe. For Chinese philosophy, it's a friend or potential friend. That makes all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would like to hear your opinion on what are on the relations between US and Russia. As you say, on a potential way to stabilizing them, but the relations to China have a lot of facets. That you have the economic relation, you have
But it's inevitable that the hegemon that used to be the United States of America will realize that it's 2 against 1 now. It's very helpful to remind ourselves that China is more a civilization than a country. It is united now, but it goes way back and it has certain standards. And, you know, we only have 250 years in the United States. We have some values that we're used to. Europe has still more depth in values, and Russia does too. So what we need to do really is kind of listen to each other. Now the Chinese say, hello, how about we just get along? How about maybe, have you thought of a win-win sort of thing, you know? And the people are very poorly educated people in the best schools just can't get rid of the idea that, you know, we have to win. I mean, after all, that's what America is all about. We're the winners, right? Now, it's going to be a long time before people begin to realize that not only is that not true, it's really dangerous. Because if we go off offensively attacking other people, it's going to come back and really haunt us. Now, the tectonic shift in the relations of the world is now Russia and China together against the US. We also have another budding hegemon in Iran. And the world is changing. BRICS is a wonderfully hopeful development, but it's going to take a long time before the West, so-called, realizes that BRICS is not something that has to be sanctioned or tariffed or ignored or accused of trying to undermine the dollar, for God's sake. You know, BRICS is the new world, and we have to get rid of the new world. It was 250 years ago that we were the new world, and things change, and we have to get used to it. That's about all I'll say on that.
Dankeschön. dazugeschaltet. Naledi Pandor ist noch dran, Hans von Sponeck und auch Herr Lumumba, Patrick Lumumba. Deswegen würde ich gerne die Frage, wir werfen dann das Licht, ich hoffe, das blendet dich dann nicht, wir werfen das Licht dann an die Leinwand. Ich würde gerne auch Frau Dr. Pandor mal direkt fragen. Sie hat interessanterweise auch zu meiner Überraschung gesagt, dass sie sehr viel Hoffnung auf Berlin setzt. Also hier ist ja eigentlich so ein bisschen die Höhle des Löwen, wenn man sich die Medienberichterstattung über die Welt und auch unsere Kriegsmobilisierung anschaut. Wieso setzen Sie so viel Hoffnung in Berlin und auch hier die Konferenz des Schiller-Instituts und OKV und andere Organisationen? Was war Ihr Motiv dafür?
Well, I believe that a new momentum is being built. I think the global community is more aware of international developments at this time than it has been for many, many decades. There's a great deal of disquiet, but there is also positive activism, and we need to build on that. I believe that the Schiller Institute, through initiating conversations that focus on the real facts in international relations, has begun a momentum which should draw in a wider range of organizations and individuals, because I believe communities are thirsting for change, for fundamental change, and for a difference from what we're experiencing today. And I think that having a meeting in the place where the domination of Africa was discussed and sanctioned in the 19th century, and meeting there once more in the 21st century may begin a movement toward Berlin becoming a new positive space for new ideas, for the development of Africa, for an end to this desire for war and domination. So this is why I repose belief in this 21st century Berlin Conference. In that, I hope it will produce activists. I hope it will draw organizations and individuals together in the International Peace Coalition, which Schiller Institute has been one of the few brave organizations to initiate. So this is why I have this belief. I believe very strongly in the action of organizations, of institutions, and of individuals. I've moved away from blame because we do know what the problem is. But how do we marshal sufficient global responses that can, in fact, indicate to those who are our so-called leaders in government that we do not accept what they're doing today, and that we, as a global majority, seek a change? This is very clear from the deliberations we held in the BRICS summit recently and its conclusions. A new framework is being discussed and set out, and we now need to persuade the world that a moment has arrived for a new direction. And perhaps that conviction could come out of the Berlin conference. Of course, I'm not naive in, not understanding the problems that confront all of us. I think all of us are confronted by deeply troubling and complex problems. But I do believe we need to use institutional momentum, on-the-ground organizational ability to begin a movement that changes both values and principles that are so dominant in the world today. I cannot lose faith because the need for change is so urgent and so necessary that it is improbable for me to believe that we'll forever be on a path of disaster. I believe the world can change, and we should utilize every effort to secure a change. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Wir bekommen also nicht nur chinesischen Optimismus, sondern jetzt auch südafrikanischen. Bevor ich zum nächsten Sprecher übergehe, Dr. Pandor hat die internationale Friedenskoalition erwähnt. Einige kennen das vielleicht schon, natürlich, aber einige nicht. Kannst du das mal ein bisschen erklären?
Das ist eine Initiative, die wir vor über 2 Jahren begonnen haben, also im Kontext der Ukraine-Krise.
In the context of the Ukraine crisis.
Morden, die in Gaza stattfinden.
But also the Middle East, Gaza crisis.
Jeden Freitag um 17 Uhr mit
Friday,
der
17
Zoom-Verbindung.
hours in the
Das sind
afternoon.
inzwischen,
In the Zoom
also
meeting.
So
in the meantime, we have at least 10,000
Menschen und
people.
Zum Teil Vertreter von Organisationen.
Some partly representatives of organizations, and
jeden Freitag
every Friday we have speakers for the first hour. McGovern is an integral part of these talks, and we always try, given the situation in the Ukraine or in the Middle East, to find competent experts that everybody who is fighting for peace will find a very competent evaluation of the situation. Further process, we have a discussion where people are introduced by Zoom and they can participate in the discussion. And then we always have proposals what we can do in terms of demonstrations. We have resolutions. We are discussing programmatic initiatives as the Oasis plan. We had many diplomats from Israel and Palestine who support this plan. We want to have that several governments from the international, from the Middle East, that they support the Oasis plan. It's hard to say about optimism here, but the genocide in Gaza is going on all the time. Therefore, I can only say I see as a chance that the Oasis plan as a peace plan for Middle East. I see a big opportunity for that, but it also needs another initiative that we need an international security and development architecture, that we put that on the agenda, that this can be realized. We need a consensus that we are going towards a new paradigm. And when the big nuclear powers agree that the war in the Middle East must end, then it could be ended immediately. So it's not impossible. It could really happen. The idea of an international security and Entwicklungsarchitektur, development architecture, goes back in Europe to the tradition of the Westphalian peace, which ended 150 years of religious wars in Europe, because the participants in the war became aware that they could not win because everybody would be dead. A third of part of Europe were dead. The villages were destroyed, and from out of that recognition in Münster and Osnabrück, there were talks for 2 years, which have and the principles had been agreed to end the war. One of the principles was you have to respect the interests of the other. That that was the beginning of the international law, which didn't exist at all. And we think that in times where with nuclear weapons, we have the possibility to annihilate ourselves. We need a much more earnest discussion on that, given this threat to mankind. We have to sit together and look for principles how the life of the nations could be improved. I've proposed 10 principles, which you find on the internet. It's the beginning of a discussion of how such an order could look like. And the same idea comes from Xi Jinping, who thinks more in terms of the Chinese tradition of Confucius and so forth. His 3 initiatives and development and civilizatory initiative. Because all that is a similar conception how you can overcome conflicts. In my case, it goes back to Nicholas of Cusa and his notion of the coincidence oppositorum, the idea that mankind is always possible to find a solution on a higher level than on the level of the crisis that happens. And this only can mean today that we propose a one humanity and all interests must be submitted to that. I'm absolutely convinced that this can be part of the reorganization of the United Nations, which was talked by Mr. Sponeck. And this is an extremely important to seriously discuss about it, either in the UN General Assembly or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which would invite many others. But such a forum must be found immediately, and I would think that Germany will play an important role there. And the hopes which Mrs. Pandor connects to Berlin, it can very well be that there are initiatives which move from the world from the abyss, and I would like to ask you to commit yourself to that.
Dankeschön. Wir haben doch noch Abbey Makoe dazu bekommen. Er ist der Gründer und Herausgeber des Global South Media Network, also des Mediennetzwerks Globaler Süden. Können wir den auf die Leinwand bekommen? Mal sehen, ob das klappt. Herr Makoe, können Sie mich hören? Any chance? Ansonsten würde ich
good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Zu Hans von Sponeck. Was ist das? Ich kann die Zeichen nicht deuten. Also gibt es noch jemanden, den wir online jetzt, der noch nicht dran war, den wir dran nehmen könnten? Hans von Sponeck oder Hison? Hans, wir können dich noch nicht sehen, aber...
Can you hear me?
Ich würde gerne noch eine Frage auch an dich richten, beziehungsweise... Oh, jetzt haben wir. Herr Makoe, guten Tag. Wir haben jetzt leider zu dieser fortgeschrittenen Zeit nicht mehr die Möglichkeit, Ihre gesamte Rede.
We don't have the time to listen to your whole speech, but I don't know what you had the chance to hear to the conference, but you should have the chance to at least utter some of your ideas.
Okay. You can speak. Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see and hear you. You can speak for a couple of minutes. Please, go ahead.
Okay. No. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to express my personal gratitude to Helga for this personal invitation. This is I've been following the Schiller Institute since in recent times after we had met, of course, in China, Zelda and I and her team. And I have taken keen interest in the work of Schiller Institute. And I'm glad that I've been able today to participate from the media perspective, of course, and giving my input about the changes that are required, as Dr. Naledi Pandor was earlier saying, and other speakers have alluded to, about the international peace in this treacherous and unjust world order. I believe that the media has a crucial role to play, and where the media fails, and unfortunately at this stage in world affairs, the media is found wanting because the bulk of the media is of course embedded, as you are well aware. At the same time, we must not generalize and blame every aspect of facet of the media in the international community, because there are very many media practitioners who are doing a fantastic job of actually speaking truth to power and exposing all the horrors and unfairness that is taking place in the world. And I believe that for us to achieve our goals, we can only do so when we begin to have a media that is responsible, a journalism fraternity that goes back to the basics and appreciate the fundamental role of the media in free societies as those who keep everybody, especially those in power, on check and accountable to the masses, to the publics, to the electorate. And my contribution in this conference really is about the dangers that are inherent when we have an embedded media dominating the narrative of the world order. That's where we are. These are the inputs that I wanted to give. Of course, I have shared my paper with the organizers of the conference, and I hope that the paper will be distributed so that other people can read it in their own time and have it on their records. Thank you so much.
Okay. Ist der Lumumba noch an der
Ist
Stimme?
Herr Lumumba noch dran? Nein.
Das heißt also, der nächste Schritt wäre eigentlich,
Heißt
wenn es hier noch
jetzt,
Reaktionen gibt auf das,
wenn
was
es hier
gerade
noch
gesagt wird,
Reaktionen gibt auf das, was gesagt wurde, untereinander. Ansonsten würde ich gerne das Publikum einbeziehen. I think we can now open the discussion for the audience. If you have a question to ask, please present yourself.
Very inspiring session. I will just quickly say that my name is Mrutyunjay Mishra. I am from India originally. I'm probably assuming that I'm the only Indian in the room, and metaphorically speaking, the only elephant in the room. I would like to just share a small statement and then ask my question, that when I grew up in India, we were so fond of Russia. We were like, I lived 3 years in Bombay, and Bollywood was like our thing, but we thought, wow, how come the Russians are able to dance better than us? We invented the chess, but we thought that the Russians played better than us. So we kind of looked up to it, and we had good relations. Then coming to Europe, I'm quite perplexed and astonished that there is, and I would dare to say this now after listening even more to the presentation from the input from Russia, that there is this Russophobia. The Russophobia, there's so much sentiment against this. I am not able to understand. So I'd ask the panel that what can we do about this? Because that would probably, when people in Europe start assuming, then there would be a change. Thank you very much.
This McGovern, because he is no Russophobe, and there are reasons for it. Do you want to address the question of the Gentlemen.
Just let me tell a very small vignette, if I can be heard. I was in Russia for the 80th celebration of the end of World War II, and I was with Oliver Stone, so I got to meet some very important people. And one such person, not the very top level, but the next level down, looked at me over a dinner that he arranged for us, small dinner, and he said, Mr. McGovern, I understand that you're a specialist in Russia, that you have an advanced degree in Russian studies. Why is it that you don't hate us? I was taken aback, and then I began to think, my God, I'm a generation or a half a generation before the Brzezinskis and the Richard Pipes and all the fancy people, many of them Polish refugees who drank Russophobia from their mother's milk, for God's sake. I escaped all that. I learned enough Russian history and Russian literature and Russian music and Russian opera. I mean, you couldn't hate Russia if you knew about it, right? So I explained that to him. It was really kind of hard for him to sort of understand that, but then later he told me, oh, well, that explains why you're not like all the others. And I think this is one real problem, because the Russian studies departments of various universities have really, really crumbled. Russian is not one of the favorite languages taught, and an expertise is left with people almost as old as I am, and that's a problem.
Professor Zhang.
Well, in fact, you know, in the West, including Europe, there's not only Russophobia, but also Sinophobia, Islamic phobia. So these three phobias are really the problems in the West. Chinese message for the whole world, why China has, I would say, you know, done so well in the past decades, because the key philosophy is seeking truth from facts, not from dogmas, whether from East or from the West. So we look at the United States as it is, we look at Europe as it is, we look at EU as it is, we look at Africa as it is. And then we have this ideal, we have to strive for win-win for all. So at the end of the day, you'll find us, whether it's Sinophobia, Russophobia, Islamic phobia, if we are really trapped in these phobias, in the end, you yourself suffer. Because I had encountered with German media, mainstream media in the past, UK media, American media, French media, so anti-China. You know. So I said, I explained this to you once, twice, 3 times. I stop. I leave you in darkness. And you are going to regret yourself. It's happening now. You may find that since DeepSeek this year, the Western mainstream media, almost every day, there's at least one major article on what China has done right, why United States and Europe should learn from China, from industrial policy to planning to whatever ecosystem building, even to DeepSeek model, whatever. Which means for one thing or another, in the end, you know, because we predict, for instance, 2011, Arab Spring will become Arab winter. From day one of the Ukrainian crisis, we said Ukraine, #1 victim. Europe, #2 victim. So sometimes, you know, listen to the Chinese advice. It's helpful.
Helga, du kennst Russland. Gut, hast du auch deine Einschätzung?
Ich könnte sehr viel dazu sagen. Ich denke,
Helga,
es ist
you know
hauptsächlich
China starts 1984 to the dialogue of civilizations, always to have as a part of conferences. We'll have tonight a concert where we try different things from just examples from Chinese music, European music. Today, in the morning is the beginning. What South African hymn, one is which one of our friends has arranged,
Aber wir wollen damit zum Ausdruck bringen,
that
dass
we want to express that the best things of all cultures, we have to get to know them. If you do that without prejudice, see what is the best in each culture, it's you enrich yourself. It's you earn new universes. It's, for example, Chinese painting, the literati painting. I was very impressed by it. So you have painting, calligraphy, and poetry in one piece of art. That does not exist in Europe. So you see what is a metaphor in one piece of art in a very new way. So you win with each new culture, you discover a whole universe. And I think it's such a richness of cultures. We would be so much poorer if we would all had be all much like soldiers, uniform through the world. So we have the dialect of culture. We have civilizations. We really, really have that, push that in the center of our peace ambitions.
Next question from the audience. Perhaps we can collect two questions. So this is from Helmut Hess in Braunschweig. I would like to address 2 points. I see the problem of Merz, that politically so much is going wrong. And Merz says we just have to fight a war and win the war. That's the something I think is horrible. And the question is, how do we deal with it? And I guess we need to replace this government. And the other thing is Ray McGovern, in a way, is an old comrade. I have met him years ago, and he said, we have to do something. So it's much more important to do something than nothing. And he's doing what he can with his professional force. I think this is very good and something that shows us how we can make progress, that we demonstrate the difference between the bad and the good, and that we always try to amend things. So next question. Serene Eckert. I'm from Potsdam, where I lived some time. I would like to thank the people here for this impressive initiative of the Schiller Institute. I would like to thank very much for that. And I would like to address my question to that was also put into from the African person speaking here, which is the media. This all these wrong, fake narratives that create this Russophobia in China and Islamophobia. All this is created by the hegemony of the media, of the hegemon, and their refined propaganda techniques. like which they professionally or scientifically work to model our minds. And if we look at the cooperation with the BRICS and these new international alliances, I think we should create an alternative media network, which would more than other institutions before that, like all these social networks that we need to use when we want to contribute. How can we create more cooperation to create a narrative which is based on the facts, on the knowledge of what's really going on? And I think this is an important, I think this is should be a major focus of our work. So I'd like to have some people here from the podium to answer. Ray, what did you say?
Yeah. I would say that the biggest change that I have observed in the last 8 decades is that we no longer have a free media. That could not be more important. And if my impression is correct, the media here in Germany is just as bad as the media in the United States. Now, we used to talk about the military-industrial complex, and it's grown like Topsy, if you will. General Eisenhower warned against the increasing growth and the increasing power of the military-industrial complex, but he was only talking about the military and the industrial, and he tried to say congressional, but that was a bridge too far for him to say then. But now I've got an acronym which is Mickey-Mat. It sort of resembles Mickey Mouse, so you can remember it. And it is on the final exam, so those of you with the pencils, it's the military-industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Now, you know what all the other initials mean. Why do I say media as if in all capital letters? Well, because the media is the cornerstone for this whole complex. Without the media, you can't do the kinds of things that our leaders lead us into. And who controls the media? Very simple, folks. The rest of the Mickey-Mat. The media is controlled by the corporations that profiteer on war making, on building Leopard tanks and Rheinmetall and Großmafei, and they all have a stake in the media, and so do all our profiteers, our military-industrial profiteers in our country. So, alternative Medien, that's just incredibly important these days. Schiller Konferenzen, auch sehr schön, auch sehr wichtig. So, what I suggest is you spread the word around, because it's up to us. Again, there's no one to do this but us.
Ganz genau. Es sind ja auch einige Medien hier, natürlich nicht ARD und Arte oder was, aber wir haben auch eine Pressekonferenz am Donnerstagabend gemacht, und da sind auch einige alternative Medien gekommen, und ich bin immer wieder erstaunt, dass die doch eine große Reichweite mittlerweile haben. Vielleicht dieselbe Frage an Professor Zhang. About China and many other countries. What's your take on the question about forming an alternative media network to bring out, truthful facts?
Yes. In the first place, because I did not have any translation, so I did not hear the exact question. But your message is clear. Okay. I can explain. Yeah. And I'm all in favor of alternative media. And it's
my focus was on network.
A network, well, yeah, that's even more important. Okay. Yeah, And especially today, you have not only official media, but also social media and AI and everything. So authentic, genuine information is crucial. And what we call the authoritative news, whatever. In the end, you think this is something reliable. Perhaps we should discuss that. You know, we have concrete proposal how to do it. Actually, we are doing that in China as well. Yeah. Just one quick answer to the first question concerning your domestic affairs.
Right.
Chinese principle is don't intervene in domestic affairs. Yet, you know, I want to say one thing concerning Western political system, this election. You know, I debate with Professor Fukuyama, the author of The End of History, back in 2011. He said that China needs political reform, adopt Western political system, one person, one vote, multi-party system. I answered, I said, both China system, American system should go through reforms. But US system needs more reforms. Yeah. And I said, without significant reform, you are going to elect a leader worse off than George W. Bush. That was in 2011. In the end, I know what happened. So I just tell you briefly how China elects its leader. If the Western leader is called election, Chinese process is called selection plus election. If you look at the top leadership in China, the top 7 members of standing committee of the Communist Party of China, minimum requirement for most members, 2 terms of the number 1 of a province, which means literally they've governed over 100 million people, given the size of China, before they came to this position today. So we call the selection plus election, selection first, meritocracy, vigorous, yes. And secondly, decision-making process, that's very important. We have learned a lot from the Soviet Union, but we reformed the Soviet model, adapting to Chinese reality. We call the Soviet learning created this so-called democratic centralism. By the time of Stalin, it became more centralism and less even no democracy. But in the case of China, with so much challenges from WTO and more and to the AI revolution, so it's a vigorous process of democratic centralism, Chinese style, which means for real decision, quality decision, like 5-year plan, it has hundreds, if not more, consultations at all levels of Chinese society, think tanks, within party, outside party. German plan. It's about intelligence economy. So China produced a plan called the Made in China 2025. But now, German industry 4.0 shattered. But China's 2025 successfully implemented. So China became the leader in so many sectors, as you mentioned, Australian think tanks report, over 50 out of 60 critical areas of the new economy. So we produce plan, learn a lot from other countries, including from Germany, from former Soviet Union, but adapt to China reality, and we try to excel. But we hopefully really to share all this, the difference between DeepSeek and Silicon Valley cultures. DeepSeek is we should encourage and allow each and every village in the world to use AI, not just monopoly by Silicon Valley and for super profits. So this is the principle, philosophy, and Chinese practice. Thank you.
Sehr gut. Helga.
You do not only have experience with media, yet we also have education as a journalist. So what can you say about the methods of the Merz government? Very shortly, I want to answer Professor Zhang. problem is obvious that China today has the German qualities, and Germany has left the Chinese work a lot. They're efficient. You can trust them. All these good things that used to be part of the German economic miracle that China is doing today, while Germany is using the American model, Anglo-American of profit and neoliberal thinking. As the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov once said, the problem is we don't understand each other anymore because the West is has post-Christian values, not the values that were there from generation to generation, but neoliberal. In that means everything is allowed. If today everything is everything, so then if that's today, that's not enough. Then we have even more perversion, violence, all these negative things. So that's why we are on the way down, and that's why the Schiller Institute is propagating the dialect of classical cultures, where every nation and every civilization uses its best traditions, and that's the basis for a dialogue. So, and concerning Mr. Merz, I cannot say much more. I just say he was a career as a top position of Hongsheng Bank Corporation, and then BlackRock, and that it was his training for the job he's doing. I don't see much hope, except there will be new election very soon, and I would wish that even also in the CDU, like in the SPD, where there was this manifesto, which is quite popular. Also in the CDU and CSU, that there are still Christians in those parties that would maybe do. So we don't like a policy which endangers Germany's existence, because if we send towers to Ukraine, Germany will be the target. As Professor Trenin said, it's a very clear message. If there's a Russian reaction, and he's sure it will come, it will not be in the Far East, but here. And we have wake up the population. We had Professor Postol at one Zoom conference recently. He showed the maps, hundreds of nuclear bombs which will fall on Germany. We will not exist anymore. And that must be in part of the consciousness. In the 1980s, in the rockets crisis, there was hundreds of thousands of people on the street because they knew we were on the verge of World War III. But today, the people are sleepwalking, and the peace movement is just a small group. We have to change that. We founded the International Peace Coalition with the idea to go over ideological differences and the doctrine, divide and conquer. Right now it works perfectly. I don't want to talk about, but if you say my name, there's people in Germany who still go unconscious just with the name. So really, the Peace Coalition has to be made bigger. So all parts of the peace movement internationally will be one. So we are working on that in Africa. We have very many people in Latin America, part of the International Peace Coalition, and these institutions were also Mrs. Pandor also called on this, that this becomes the majority and the war policy will be stopped. And on the networking of alternative media, I see it also as a very central work for us. And I think if we do that fast and get many collaborators who try to go over differences, that we can make it. And mainstream media are not that respected anymore. And if we manage here and there to have a different voice, like Ray McGovern, like Professor Zhang, like Madame Pandor, Herr von Sponeck, I think we have a good chance of may have a better conscience very soon. now we have really earned the Uzbek Prof. So we will have now 1 hour lunch break. I thank very, very much all the speakers and the audience. Enjoy your meal and be back on time for the second panel. We have wonderful speakers. And tonight, don't miss the concert.